My name is Linda Holly, I'm 31 years old, and the last thing my parents ever handed me before they closed the front door wasn't a hug, it was $30 folded into my palm and one sentence that echoed through every year of my life: you can handle it, he can't. I was 19, my college acceptance letter was still sitting unopened on my bed, and everything I owned fit inside 2 trash bags and an old backpack. I stood on the porch of our house in Boise, Idaho, watching my younger brother Ethan cry through the living room window while my mother pulled the curtains shut like I had already stopped existing for 11 years. No one from my family called to ask where I slept, whether I had enough to eat, or if I was even alive. Then one rainy Thursday my phone rang while I was finishing a shift at the emergency department in Seattle, Washington. My father's voice was shaking as he whispered, "Linda, your brother needs you." I leaned against the hospital hallway wall and smiled because I already knew one thing: they were not calling because they loved me, they were calling because they needed something only I had. But what they didn't know was that the homeless 19-year-old they threw away with $30 had spent the next decade building a life they could never imagine, and the reason they suddenly remembered my number would uncover a family secret far uglier than the night they abandoned me. If you had asked me at 19 who mattered most in our house, the answer was always Ethan. He was 2 years younger than me, and from the day he was born my parents treated him like delicate glass. Every sacrifice somehow became my responsibility. Every dream I had could wait, because according to my mother, "Linda, you're strong, you'll always land on your feet." I believed those words until the night they used them as the reason to throw me out of my own home. At first, I thought getting kicked out was the worst thing that could ever happen to me. I was wrong. The hardest part wasn't sleeping in my old Honda for 3 nights or stretching $30 into a week of cheap gas station sandwiches. The hardest part was believing my parents had been right about me, that I really was the one who could survive anything while Ethan couldn't. I kept repeating those words until they almost sounded like a compliment. Instead, they became the excuse for every sacrifice they demanded from me. Growing up in our house, there were only 2 roles: Ethan was protected, and I was prepared. When he forgot homework, I stayed up helping him finish it. When he wanted to play baseball, my college savings quietly paid for his travel team. My parents always promised they would replace the money later. They never did. By the time I graduated high school, nearly every dollar I had earned working weekends at a neighborhood grocery store had disappeared into another family emergency that somehow always belonged to Ethan. Then came the night everything ended. My father sat at the kitchen table without looking at me while my mother calmly explained that Ethan had been accepted into an expensive private academy across the state. They couldn't afford tuition unless someone made a sacrifice. I remember laughing because I honestly thought they were asking me to postpone college for 1 semester. Instead, my mother slid $30 across the table and told me I was officially an adult if I was really as capable as everyone said. Then I could figure life out on my own. Ethan needed stability more than I did. I looked at my brother hoping he would say something, anything, but he kept staring at the floor with tears running down his face and whispered he was sorry. My parents called it tough love. I called it abandonment. I packed 2 trash bags with clothes, grabbed my documents, and drove away before sunrise without knowing where I would sleep. The last thing I saw in my rearview mirror was Ethan standing alone on the front porch, wearing the baseball jacket my savings had helped buy. As I disappeared down the road, I made myself one promise: if I ever built a better life, no one would ever have the power to throw me away again. I kept that promise even when it hurt more than breaking it would have. I worked every job nobody else wanted. I cleaned office buildings before sunrise, stocked shelves overnight, and attended community college during the day. 4 years later, I earned my nursing degree and accepted a position at a hospital in Seattle. I rented a small apartment, then bought my first condo before I turned 28. Every achievement felt quiet because there was nobody left to call, but I stopped waiting for my family to notice me. I built a life where my worth wasn't measured by what I could sacrifice for someone else. Then one rainy Thursday, 11 years after they had thrown me out, my phone buzzed with a number I never expected to see. Dad. I stared at the screen until it almost stopped ringing before answering. His voice sounded older, weaker, almost frightened. "Linda, Ethan needs you." Not hello, not how have you been, just the same pattern with older faces. I asked one simple question: what happened? He hesitated before saying Ethan had collapsed at work and was now recovering in a hospital outside Portland, Oregon. They needed me there immediately. Something about his voice felt rehearsed, so instead of driving straight there, I called the hospital myself. A nurse confirmed Ethan had been admitted, but she also mentioned something my father conveniently left out: he wasn't dying, he was stable and expected to recover within days. My stomach tightened. If Ethan wasn't in immediate danger, then why the panic? I drove anyway, mostly because despite everything, Ethan had never actually chosen what happened between Us when I walked into his hospital room he looked shocked to see me then burst into tears. Before I could say a word he hugged me harder than anyone ever had and whispered, "I didn't think you'd come." We talked for hours about the years we'd lost. He admitted our parents spent every conversation blaming me for abandoning the family. They told him I cared more about money than about him. They even claimed I had refused every attempt they made to reconnect. None of it was true. Then Ethan looked toward the door to make sure nobody was listening before lowering his voice. "Linda, they're lying to both of us again. They didn't call you because of me." He swallowed hard before adding the sentence that made every piece of the puzzle shift. "Dad is about to lose everything and they think you're the only person who can save him." Suddenly the phone call made perfect sense. I wasn't invited back as a daughter. I had been summoned as their backup plan once again. For the next 3 days, I stayed in Portland, but not because of my parents. I stayed because Ethan deserved at least one person who showed up without asking for anything in return. We talked about everything we had missed: birthdays, holidays, my nursing graduation, the first apartment I bought, the years he believed I hated him, and the years I believed he had happily taken my place. We were both victims of the same story written by someone else. On the fourth morning, Ethan handed me a folder he had hidden inside the drawer beside his hospital bed. "You need to see this before Mom and Dad get here." Inside were bank statements, loan documents, and notices from attorneys. My parents hadn't gone broke because of medical bills like they claimed. They had spent years taking out loans to keep rescuing bad investments my father refused to walk away from. Then they borrowed against their house, then against their retirement. By the time they called me, they were only weeks away from foreclosure. They didn't need a daughter, they needed a paycheck. Wearing worried faces, my parents arrived an hour later. My mother hugged the air near me without actually touching me, then immediately placed a stack of papers on Ethan's bed. "If you sign these today, we can stop the bank from taking the house," she said, as though asking me to pass the salt. I looked down. The documents would make me responsible for nearly $400,000 in debt. My father finally spoke. "You've done well for yourself, Linda. You always land on your feet. We knew you'd understand." I couldn't help smiling, because after 11 years they still believed I was the same frightened 19-year-old standing on their porch with $30 in her pocket. I quietly closed the folder and slid it back across the bed. "No," I said. My mother blinked in disbelief. "No," I repeated. "When you threw me out you said I could handle it, so I did. I handled sleeping in my car, I handled working 3 jobs, I handled paying for school, I handled building a life without any of you. Now it's your turn to handle the choices you made." The room fell completely silent. Then something happened I never expected. Ethan reached across the bed, picked up the loan papers, and tore them straight down the middle. He looked directly at our parents. "Stop asking her to save us. You never even apologized for destroying her life." My mother's face turned pale, while my father lowered his eyes. For the first time in my life, nobody argued because there was nothing left to defend. I hugged Ethan before leaving the hospital and promised this time we would never lose each other again. 6 months later the house was sold through foreclosure. My parents moved into a small apartment and finally lived within their means. Ethan recovered completely, found a steady job, and slowly rebuilt his own life. We still have dinner together every month, and every time the bill arrives we both laugh, because we always split it right down the middle. Fairness feels ordinary to most people, but for us it was something we had to learn as adults. Looking back, I realized my parents were right about only one thing: I really could handle it. The difference is that I finally stopped handling the consequences of their decisions and started protecting the life I fought so hard to build. Sometimes the strongest person in the family isn't the one who keeps saving everyone else, it's the one who finally has the courage to say enough.